Welcome back, Irish fans, to Breaking On Braves Boys podcast. Yesterday concluded the summer session for Notre Dame men's basketball, and we got to hear from Mike Brey, got to hear from JJ Starling, a little bit from Nate Laszewski, and we got to finally see some clips from practice, have some updates on the assistant coach search, on recruiting, because Peach Jam started a few days ago and the live period started yesterday. So going to get into who Brey watched, kind of what else he's looking for while being at Peach Jam, and that includes assistant coaching. But first, going to get into kind of the news from this summer, and that all starts with Notre Dame's two freshmen, JJ Starling, Ven Allen Lubin, Campbell, the third freshman, obviously. We do have some news on him as well, so I guess the three freshmen. But start with JJ Starling, obviously kind of the face of the program type guy, and based on the film we've seen, he's essentially who we thought he was. We knew that he was going to be ready because he was playing against a high-level competition and doing well against them. But in the clips from Notre Dame's practice, the burst, the court vision, the speed, and the shot making seemed to all translate. So he already looks like one of, if not the best offensive player on the team based on the film we've seen. So talented in about every aspect. And Brey talked a little bit about him. Seems really coachable based on what Laszewski was saying and kind of what Brey talked about too. It's pretty clear he's ahead of the curve mentally for a freshman. Comes off really mature, and Starling's presser even mentioned ball screen coverages, speed of the game, making reads, countering defensive counters, and kind of just niche basketball stuff that you don't hear from freshmen all that often in their opening presser with the media. So a lot to like from JJ Starling, and it's pretty clear he can compete at the ACC level and already can be a high-level contributor for Notre Dame. So, I mean, there's not too much new news on JJ Starling. He's kind of who we thought he was, and now it's just a matter of it translating into game action. We've seen Brey talk a lot about him as a playmaker, and we seem to be at the stage where JJ Starling can take a step as a playmaker and become Notre Dame's primary playmaker throughout the season. Marcus Hammond has also talked a lot about, as Notre Dame's primary or maybe secondary playmaker, Brey talked a lot about having high-level ACC players around him, really helping him as a playmaker and really as a shooter as well, because Hammond is a high-level shot maker, but was forced to take some tough shots at Niagara because of the limited offensive options that they had. Now he's surrounded by ACC players and a few all-ACC caliber players, and really going to help Hammond. I don't know that there's a whole lot of new info on Hammond. I think he's more of a wait until the season and see kind of guy for me, but it is good to hear Brey sing his praise a little bit like he kind of does for everybody, but lots of like with that backcourt duo. And moving on to the other big-time freshman, Campbell, obviously a really solid player, but based on what Brey has said, not really projected to be a rotation guy. We'll talk about him, but Ven Allen Lubin is the guy who Mike Brey sang the praises of this week. I'm not ready to say Ven Lubin fixes all Notre Dame's problems down low because, man, they have a lot of question marks down there, but it's very clear after this first kind of session that he's a different level of athlete than we've seen Notre Dame have down low recently. He made some exciting plays at the rim, showed his ability to attack closeouts, and Mike Brey seems to be even higher on him than the general public. Even talked about his ability to work out of the post, which is something that I haven't been super confident in. Brey even talked about how they dumped it to Atkinson last year. Maybe instead of Matt Zona being the guy they dump it down to, it's Ven Allen Lubin. He can make a dribble, make a quick move, and get to the rim. And I think that's key to Ven Allen Lubin's development as kind of a primary option for this team. He's not huge. He does have a nice build. He's incredibly athletic, but to be a high-level offensive contributor, it's going to have to come through the post a lot of the time. And if Notre Dame can even help Ven Allen Lubin get one or two moves that he can go to, then it's going to be a huge development for them. But for now, the plays he can make at the rim, the plays he can make out of attacking a closeout, and just kind of the impact he can make with his athleticism, doing the dirty work, and just being a threat with that is going to be huge. And there's a reason Mike Brey talked about him potentially starting, which I didn't really even think was possible going into the offseason, to be honest with you. But Mike Bray seems to be incredibly high on Ven Allen Lubin, and although I think he's still a little bit of a work in progress, there's obviously a ton of reasons to kind of share Mike Bray's sentiment, and we saw that a little bit in the film from yesterday. So moving on from the freshmen, there is a little bit of news. I would say this is probably the only bad news we got yesterday. JR Konieczny, I've learned, has been out for the last 2 or so weeks with an ankle injury that will keep him out for a little bit longer. It's kind of a minor injury, but it has been nagging at him for essentially the entire summer. It seems like it's certainly been a setback for a guy who is going to be a fringe rotation guy and was fighting for a spot. Still, in theory, fighting for a rotation spot, but doesn't seem to be really talked about much by Mike Bray. In that regard, Bray seems to have his 7 or 8, and JR is going to have to be a late addition to that if he's going to be in the rotation. A guy who's super talented, but has some work to do in the weight room, and just has some work to do in terms of fitting into what Notre Dame wants to do. And that ankle injury is certainly not something that you would like to hear from him, but fortunately for them, it's not incredibly serious, and he should be good to go in August to go to Spain and play with the American All-Star team that will be playing out there. And I think that's going to be interesting to see kind of how he fits into that team. And it's always good for a guy like JR Konieczny, who came from a smaller high school where he was heavily relied upon. It's good for him to go play with other good players and learn how to fill a role, learn how to be more of a team defender rather than a one-on-one defender, and just learn more about the nuances of playing team basketball. And it's not like JR is a selfish guy. He just hasn't been exposed to the kind of role building that a guy like Nate Laszewski or Dane Goodwin has. And I think it's going to be really good for him to go to Spain in a few months. But obviously the ankle injury is bad news and could lead to him not being a huge contributor this year. Not only that, but kind of the veteran presence around this Notre Dame team. What you really want from JR Konieczny is for him to be completely ready by next summer when Marcus Hammond leaves, maybe JJ Starling leaves, Dane Goodwin's gone, Cormac Ryan's out the door, Nate Laszewski will depart, and Notre Dame will be left without really much guard or forward depth at all. You got Tony Sanders, JR, Matt Zona, Dom Campbell. There's 4, and then I know I'm missing somebody, but Alex Wade. Not really too many guys on this roster that are going to be contributors this year that'll be back next year. So the door is wide open for JR Konieczny next year, and I believe that sophomore to junior year leap will be real for him. And if he can't get it going here down the stretch of the summer, that's kind of what we need to focus on for him rather than him being maybe a swingman off the bench this year. But going to the other guys, Nate Laszewski, Cormac Ryan, Dane Goodwin, not too much news on any of them. You kind of know what you have. Nate Laszewski, I heard, has been hunting his shot a lot more. Mike Bray did mention that. And also shout out to Irish Sports Daily for killing Media Day. I think they definitely helped me out a lot by posting the Bray presser, posting some clips, which I haven't seen anywhere else. So shout out to them. But Nate Laszewski's been hunting his shot. He's I don't know that Nate Laszewski is ever going to be a super high-level off-the-dribble scorer. So by hunting his shot, I don't think that means Nate Laszewski is taking 5 dribbles and getting to a spot and rising up ahead of a guy. It's more so just Nate Laszewski has passed up open looks for years. Now you can afford to take a shot that may get tipped off the release. Maybe you can afford for your efficiency to go down a little bit. Now Nate Laszewski doesn't seem to be scared of that. And he's always been a good team basketball player, but he's never been a guy who you could really rely upon to be a super high-level scorer. And I'm not sure I really want them to rely on that. It seems like Bray is fine with that, but I would love if this was more of a guard-driven team rather than Nate Laszewski-driven team. I think we've kind of seen him max out in terms of his role and what he can do, but it seems like Mike Bray thinks there's more in the tank, and it's really interesting to see how it develops. Trey Wirtz has also been really aggressive. You can see it in the clips from the last practice. The talent for Trey Wirtz really has always been there. I don't know that he's a JJ Starling level talent or even a Marcus Hammond level talent, but the talent's always been there for Trey Wirtz to be an AC level type guy, but it's always just been about finding a role at Notre Dame. And he couldn't really do that last year. Was kind of the seventh guy, maybe the odd man out of that rotation. And the year before was also just kind of the odd man out because of how those guards had worked together for the whole summer. And then Trey Wirtz just kind of plopped in there. And Blake Wesley obviously took a lot of his reps last year. And his reps, there's not really a huge chance for him to have more reps this year. It's just about maximizing that and Notre Dame finding a way to make Trey Wirtz more effective than he has been in the past. And it seems like there is a little bit of that going on, and that's exciting if you're a Trey Wirtz believer, kind of like I've been over the last few years. And then the last guy I kind of have notes on before we get into the coaching and recruiting, Matt Zona. Matt Zona is about what we expected him to be: spot minutes, provide the body. The passing praise from Bray is a little bit surprising. It is obviously encouraging, though, and I still think Dom Campbell has a chance to be that eighth man. I wouldn't say I'd bet on that, but it seems like Mike Bray is a little optimistic about kind of where Dom Campbell's body is and where it can be by the fall. And if Dom Campbell can get his body in the right place for the fall, I think he's probably more talented than Matt Zona. And although he's not as experienced, he has a little bit longer of a way to go. I think the ceiling's much higher with Dom. And I'm not saying that I'm advocating for him to be the eighth man because I haven't seen as much practice as Bray has, at least to this point. But I certainly wouldn't rule a guy who is a top 100 recruit by a lot of services out of that role. And especially with how similar his skill set is to Zona. And I think he's probably a better low post scorer at this stage. I certainly wouldn't rule him out from taking Zona's role at some point if he can kind of get into the shape he needs to get into. And I obviously do think Zona can provide you something. I just think the ceiling is a little lower. And Dom has more room to grow, and I think he could grow rapidly. So that's about it for the players and the takeaways. Kind of touched on all the rotation guys, touched on JR, Dom, which is about what Bray talked about, and also talked about the coaching search. Bray said that they will try to be done by Labor Day, and I assume it's going to be sooner than that. Last year, the staff moves were made earlier. They ended in around June, which was, I think, a month or two after they said they wanted to fill holes. But this time I think it's going to be a little different than last time. Last time they got a grizzled vet, Anthony Solomon, which has turned out to be a really good hire to this point, and Tony White, kind of the middle of a young gun and grizzled vet, and both those hires seem to have worked out really well. This time, Bray said they want to go young for the hire, and they want it to be someone who doesn't necessarily have to work with the bigs because Anthony Solomon can do that. Maybe Pat Rogers could step in and do that, which I don't know if you want to rely on the director of basketball ops to work with the big men, but Bray seems open to that idea as well. I think maybe the most important thing outside of player development is creativity on the recruiting trail, because Anthony Solomon's going to build a good relationship with the guys. Anthony White is relatable to those guys. But I think what the staff could be lacking that Ryan Humphrey brought a ton of was creativity. They knew kind of how to get out ahead of other schools, even with NIL. And I don't think Notre Dame has the NIL packages that some schools do, but they have to find creative ways to sell Notre Dame. And I think that's kind of why Bray wants maybe a younger guy who hasn't been exposed to the industry as much, because maybe a guy like that can give you more ideas like Ryan Humphrey did over the past few years and kind of develop into what Ryan Humphrey developed into as a coach, which is a high-level dynamo-type recruiter and also a good player development guy. I think player development comes first, especially because of the other recruiters you have on staff, but I think that's certainly something that needs to be accounted for, just creativity on the recruiting trail. And the rest, I think, shouldn't be an afterthought, but that's something that I think they need to consider in their search. Lastly, Peach Jam started a few days ago. Notre Dame staff has been on the trail a ton, to my knowledge, which is not that much because I haven't actually seen Anthony Solomon there. I believe he was watching out Marco Jackson yesterday. I'm guessing is watching him today as well. Just a guess because they said Notre Dame had staff members there, and Anthony Solomon was not at Peach Jam from what I saw. So I'm guessing Marco Jackson is a guy that Notre Dame has checked in on. Seems like their number one guard target. Mike Bray and Antoni White were in the stands for Laurent Rice versus R.J. Jones and Zayden High. R.J. Jones is a recent Notre Dame offer who I finally got to get a good look at. Reminds me of kind of a mix of Jameel Brown and TJ Gibbs. I think he is a little bit more athletic than TJ Gibbs, a little bit quicker, but maybe not as great of a shooter as Gibbs was. But as an engaged defender, a lot to like from R.J. Jones. He's not an elite level guard like Marco Jackson could be, but he is a guy who could be a solid college basketball player, and Notre Dame's never going to turn one of those down. Laurent Rice didn't have an awesome game against R.J. Jones yesterday, had around 6 points, I think, but it's pretty clear that the ceiling with Laurent Rice is incredibly high. He sees the floor well. He's athletic. He can get by you when he wants to. He's just not that aggressive right now, and the offensive game has a little bit of ways to go. But the mid-range game is there. He can shoot a little bit, and he's athletic enough to be a good finisher around the rim. So I like what I saw from those two, and I'm not sure Notre Dame really has a chance with Zayden High, but I do really like Zayden High's game. So that's about what I have for Peach Jam. They watched them. They also watched TJ Power, and all three of the staff members were in for TJ Power. Antoni White, Mike Bray, and Pat Rogers were in the stands for that game, and then the last game I saw they were at was or actually there's two games. Antoni White was in the stands for Aiden Holloway and CP3, even though I don't think they're going to get Aiden Holloway, especially after he transferred from Lalu. And then Pat Rogers and Mike Bray were at Team Durant, which was Amani Hansberry, who Notre Dame had reached out to in the past and seems to still have interest in, but hasn't quite offered or pulled the trigger on the offer yet. So that's about what I have. Just wanted to do kind of an update episode, put some analysis in on Notre Dame's current roster, some of the recruiting decisions, and some of the staff decisions coming up. So thank you guys for watching. We'll be back soon for sure. So thank you guys for watching. God bless and peace.